Audition by Katie Kitamura was shortlisted for the Booker Prize in 2025. So should you put this on the shortlist of your TBR, or should you shortlist this right to the trash? Hi, I'm Amanda, and this is Spineless Books, your one-stop, spoiler-free shop for all things audiobook. I became interested in Audition when I saw that it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize. I put most of the shortlisted books into Libby and decided to just wait and see what came up. And this book came up at the perfect time. I was looking for something short. I didn't have a lot of other options in the moment, so when it came up and it was under 200 pages or less than 6 hours on audiobook, I knew this was a good fit. On top of that, this book has a number of accolades in addition to the Booker Prize nominee. It got the National Book Critics Circle Award for fiction, and it also got the She Reads Award for literary fiction. So it's a pretty accomplished text. So what is it that makes this book so intriguing to critics, and is it going to be intriguing to me or you as a reader? The book follows an unnamed actress in her middle age, and her entire life is turned upside down when a young man named Xavier appears and claims to be her grown son. Now, if that sounds like an interesting start of a story to you, hold on just a second. This book is not exactly what you think, and if that sounds like the setup for a plot, it's kind of not. Because this book, in my opinion, doesn't really have a plot. I think of this book as purely a character study. Now, when Xavier arrives, we get to learn the actress's reaction, we get to learn her dynamic with her husband, we get to know the way she interacts with her colleagues, and we learn a lot about her, but we don't learn a lot about a whole lot else. I was about the midpoint of the book when I started to realize I really wasn't sure what was going on. But I know, because of what happened at the midpoint of the book, that that was okay, and it was probably Katie Kitamura's intention. Now, I don't want to spoil the midpoint of the book for you, but I will simply say, literally everything changes. You've still got your characters that you know, but the context for everything is completely different starting in the midpoint of the book. Midway through, Katie Kitamura forces you to relearn your thoughts about each of the characters. They remain the same in the book. They're all still there, the actress, Xavier, her husband, her colleagues, but things have shifted and things are completely turned on their head. I don't want to explain how, because that kind of gives away the point of the book, and I'd rather you experience that for yourself. But just know that it's really unusual and it is not what you would expect. There are layered realities in this book, and it's a very different structure than a traditional narrative. So if you were to enter this book thinking you're going to be reading a traditional novel, you're going to be either really disappointed or really confused, as I was, because that's what I assumed, that it was a traditional novel. But there are structural choices in this story that are so unusual and so different that I really can only tell you how I felt reading the book, not really what it's about, because then I'm spoiling everything for your experience, which is never my intention. I think the best thing I can describe about this book is the weird tension that I felt while I was listening. It really had me on edge, and I felt uncomfortable, and I kept feeling like something really bad was going to happen, even though that wasn't necessarily what was happening in the actual story. But it just made me really feel weird and like I had a knot in my stomach the entire time I read it. Now, it's not a thriller, but the situations were so uncomfortable and the dynamic was so off-putting. But you kind of have to read it for yourself if you want to know what I mean. Narrator Tracy Kato Kiriyama definitely added to this tension. Now, it is written into the text by Katie Kitamura, so it's not like the narrator invented anything, but boy does she add to the feeling that everything is on edge in this story, and it just made me so uneasy, and I don't know that I could tell you that I liked it, but it had me hooked for sure. And it definitely made me really curious about what was going to go on, what was the author trying to get me to get out of this, and really what was the point of the whole book. I don't know if I can answer those questions, even having finished it. But I think if I had to describe a book that maybe is more well known that I think is closest to this, although please don't get me wrong, it is a completely different idea. But Trust by Hernan Diaz, if you've ever read that book, which also interestingly won the Pulitzer, so it's an award-winning book as well, Trust is a really interesting story because it sets you down a narrative path as a reader, and then it changes the understanding of that narrative path and kind of widens your view, and then it continues to do that as you read. So you start out thinking you understand things, and every time you feel like you have a little bit of clarity, the book turns you on its head and makes you understand that you really didn't know what you were talking about to begin with. So that's the closest comparison I could make to Audition. It's not similar, they're really very different books, but the experience, I guess, you could compare a little bit between the two. I think if you're looking for a traditional story, this is not the book for you. But if you're looking for something that's really interesting as a literary piece and makes you think a lot and has a lot to talk about, I am dying to talk about this book with a group of people because I feel like there's so much there that I'm trying to process even weeks after having finished reading it, and I'm not 100% sure that I'm fully grasping it. Even though it was a book that made me feel a little bit uncomfortable, it's probably a book that I would do well to reread because I think there's a lot to go through and a lot to understand. So I think if I were to reattempt, I'd probably get a little more clarity than I have right now. Here's the good news. It's a 6-hour audiobook and it's under 200 pages. So if you do try to attempt it, it's not like it's a massive amount of time lost if you don't like it in the end. So I kind of say go for it. It was really odd and it'll definitely be a unique book and you've never read anything like it, I can promise you that. I think the narrative ambiguity in this book turns it more into an intellectual exploration than it does into a reading experience, which I'm not sure that's what I'm after personally, but I really did think that this gave me a lot to ponder and think about, and I'm not even 100% sure that I've processed my opinions on this book or ever will. When I thought about rating it, I felt really torn because I felt like I could give it 5 stars, but I also felt like I could give it 3 stars. It didn't accomplish what I was hoping for as a listener, but was that the book's fault or was that my fault for choosing something that was actually unusual? So I settled and I gave it a 4, just kind of in the middle. I do think this is worth reading due to how unusual it is, but it's not necessarily a book that's going to give you an enjoyable reading or listening experience. If you're interested in possibly redefining what you think a novel means, then I think you should pick this book up. Personally, I feel like I'm going to be a little bit unsatisfied until I get a chance to talk about it with someone. So I do have a colleague who's in progress with reading it, and I'm really looking forward to chatting with him. I've kind of resisted going online and reading people's theories about what the book means, mostly because I just want to talk about it with someone and kind of process it out loud. But you might find it really interesting, or you might really truly hate it. So remember, you might love what I hate and hate what I love. So make your own opinion, but thanks for listening to mine. See you next time.